Welcome to Mustang Tales, where resilience meets the wild. What if you discovered a creature left to die, tethered, broken, and surrounded by wolves? What would you risk to save it? This is Mustang Tales, and today's story will take you deep into the heart of survival, betrayal, and a bond that defied the odds. Hit subscribe now to join us on this gripping journey, because every legend deserves to be heard. Meet Ember, a Mustang left to rot by a man who saw him as nothing but a burden. But when a reclusive hermit named Eli intervenes, their fight for survival becomes a battle against wolves, ruthless men, and the wilderness itself. Will Ember reclaim his freedom? Can Eli protect what he's come to love? Watch until the end. Then share this story to honor every creature that refused to be broken. A man, cold and ruthless, ties a sick Mustang to a tree deep in the wilderness. The lone, weak horse is surrounded by the howls of hungry wolves. The Mustang closes its eyes, ready to meet its end. But just as the wolves close in, something extraordinary happens, something that will change everything. Stay with us for a powerful story of survival, courage, and the unexpected bonds that defy all odds. The bitter chill of dusk settled over the Montana wilderness, painting the vast forest in shades of gray and amber. The world seemed still, except for the faint rustling of leaves and the occasional howl of wolves echoing from the distant hills. Among the tranquility of nature, a grim scene disrupted the harmony. A Mustang horse, thin and trembling, stood tied to a towering pine tree. Its head hung low in exhaustion. Once a proud creature of the wild, it now looked like a ghost of its former self. Its ribs jutted out beneath its dull chestnut coat, and every breath was labored and shallow. A thick rope bit into its neck, tethering it tightly to the tree. The horse's legs quivered, its hooves digging weakly into the cold earth. It could barely stand, yet was forced to face the cruelty of fate. A man stood nearby, his shadow stretching long in the fading light. John Harper, a rugged rancher in his late 40s, watched the horse with an expression as cold as the wind. His boots crunched against the frosted ground as he adjusted the rope, ensuring it wouldn't give way. "There's no use keeping you," he muttered, his voice devoid of emotion. "You're more trouble than you're worth." The Mustang's large, glassy eyes briefly flicked to John, but there was no fight left in the animal. It was sick, its strength sapped by days of neglect. John had found the horse a week ago on his property, limping and clearly abandoned by its previous owner. At first, he thought of nursing it back to health, but with mounting debts and an already struggling ranch, he decided the horse wasn't worth the effort. John stepped back, pulling his coat tighter against the icy wind. The howls of wolves grew louder, closer. He glanced at the horizon, where the sun was sinking fast. "Behind the jagged peaks, they'll find you soon enough," he said quietly, almost to himself. He turned on his heel and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the forest without a second glance. The Mustang remained motionless, its head drooping as its ears flicked toward the distant howls. Night was falling quickly, and with it came the predators. The wolves, emboldened by hunger, would soon pick up the scent of a helpless animal. The horse shifted slightly, its legs wobbling beneath its weight, and let out a weak, mournful whinny. It wasn't a call for help. There was no one left to hear it. It was a sound of resignation, an acknowledgement of its fate. The first wolf appeared just as darkness blanketed the forest. Its glowing eyes shone like lanterns in the shadows, its sleek body moving silently through the underbrush. A second wolf joined moments later, then a third. They formed a loose circle around the tree, their low growls rumbling like distant thunder. The Mustang flinched, its nostrils flaring as the scent of danger filled the air. One wolf crept closer, its teeth bared in anticipation. It crouched low, ready to lunge. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed through the forest, a high-pitched whistle, sharp and piercing, cutting through the tension like a blade. The wolves froze, their ears swiveling toward the source of the sound. The Mustang, too, raised its head slightly, its ears flicking forward for the first time in hours. The whistle came again, followed by a rustling in the trees. A figure emerged from the shadows, carrying a lantern that cast flickering light across the scene. The wolves snarled but hesitated, their eyes darting between the figure and the horse. The man stepped closer, and as he entered the dim light, his features became clear. He was a wiry old hermit with a weathered face and sharp, determined eyes. "Get out of here!" the man barked, swinging the lantern in a wide arc. The wolves growled but began to retreat, their instincts telling them this new arrival was not to be trifled with. The pack slowly disappeared into the darkness, leaving the Mustang and the man alone beneath the towering pine. The hermit approached the horse cautiously, his eyes narrowing as he took in its condition. "Well, aren't you in a sorry state?" he muttered, pulling a knife from his belt. The Mustang tensed but didn't resist as the man carefully cut the rope binding it to the tree. "Whoever left you here wanted you dead," he said, his voice softening. "But I reckon you've got some fight left in you yet." As the last strand of rope fell away, the Mustang collapsed to the ground, its legs too weak to hold it up. The hermit crouched beside it, placing a hand on its neck. "Easy now," he murmured. "We'll get you out of here." With surprising strength for his wiry frame, the hermit fashioned a makeshift sled from fallen branches and hauled the Mustang onto it. The horse didn't protest. Its body was limp with exhaustion. The hermit hitched the sled to his mule, and together they began the slow trek back to his secluded cabin deep in the forest. The Mustang's eyes fluttered shut as the rhythm of the mule's hooves lulled it into a restless sleep. For the first time in days, the horse wasn't staring death in the face. Though its journey was far from over, it had found something it hadn't expected in the heart of the wilderness: hope. The dawn broke over the forest, spilling golden light through the dense canopy of trees. The hermit's cabin sat in a small clearing, its rough wooden walls blending almost seamlessly with the natural surroundings. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a sign of life in this isolated sanctuary. Inside, the Mustang lay sprawled on a bed of hay in a corner of the cabin, its shallow breaths the only sound in the stillness. The old hermit, whose name was Eli, moved quietly around the room. His wiry frame and weathered hands betrayed a life spent in solitude, carving out an existence in the unforgiving wilderness. He glanced over at the Mustang, his sharp eyes studying the animal's every twitch and movement. "You're a tough one," he muttered, stirring a pot of herbs and water over the fire. "Most wouldn't have made it through the night." Eli had seen his fair share of cruelty in his years, but finding the Mustang tied and abandoned had stirred something in him. He couldn't fathom what kind of man would leave a creature to die like that. As he worked, memories of his younger days surfaced. Days when he'd lived in the world beyond the forest, where greed and neglect often overshadowed compassion. He shook the thoughts away and focused on the task at hand. The horse stirred, its ears flicking at the faint crackle of the fire. Eli approached slowly, holding a steaming bowl of the herbal mixture. "This will help," he said softly, kneeling beside the animal. The Mustang tensed but didn't resist as Eli gently dripped the warm liquid into its mouth using a wooden spoon. The horse's nostrils flared, and its eyes opened slightly, meeting Eli's for the first time. In that brief moment, something passed between them, an unspoken understanding that neither of them was ready to give up. Over the next few days, Eli devoted himself to nursing the Mustang back to health. He named the horse Ember, a nod to the faint spark of life that still burned within its weakened body. Every morning, Eli would gather medicinal herbs and forage for anything that could help restore Ember's strength. He cleaned the animal's wounds with care, despite its occasional protests. Ember began to show signs of improvement. Its coat, once dull and matted, started to regain a faint sheen. The horse's breathing became steadier, and its eyes grew brighter with each passing day. Eli noticed the change and allowed himself a small smile. "You've got fight in you after all," he said one evening, sitting on a stool beside Ember. "More than most folks I've known." Despite the progress, Eli knew they weren't out of danger yet. The wolves that had circled the Mustang before hadn't gone far. At night, their howls echoed through the trees, a chilling reminder of the ever-present threat. Eli kept a rifle by the door and a lantern burning through the night, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows for movement. One morning, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, Eli decided it was time to see if Ember could stand. He removed the makeshift bandages from the horse's legs and stepped back. "All right, Ember," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Let's see what you've got." The Mustang's ears flicked toward Eli's voice, and it shifted slightly, its legs trembling beneath it. With a deep, shuddering breath, Ember pushed itself up, first onto its front legs, then its back. The effort was immense, and the horse swayed unsteadily, but it stood. Eli's chest tightened as he watched. His weathered face broke into a grin. "That's it, boy. That's it." Ember took a tentative step, then another. Its movements were slow but deliberate. The sight filled Eli with a sense of pride he hadn't felt in years. He reached out a hand, and to his surprise, Ember took another step toward him. Its dark eyes locked onto his. For the first time, the Mustang seemed to trust him. Eli spent the following days working with Ember, leading the horse outside to graze in the small clearing around the cabin. The animal grew stronger, its once sluggish movements becoming more fluid and confident. Eli marveled at Ember's resilience, the way it refused to be broken by the cruelty it had endured. But the wolves hadn't forgotten. One night, as Eli sat by the fire, Rusty, his old hound, began to growl low in his throat. Eli grabbed his rifle and stepped outside. The lantern cast flickering light over the clearing. The air was thick with tension. The silence was broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. Eli's eyes scanned the tree line, and for a moment, he thought he saw a pair of glowing eyes watching from the shadows. Eli tightened his grip on the rifle. "Not tonight," he muttered. "You won't take him tonight." Inside the cabin, Ember stood near the window, its ears swiveling at every sound. The Mustang's strength had returned, but its spirit, its will to fight, burned brighter than ever. Whatever lay ahead, Eli knew one thing for certain. Ember wasn't just a survivor. He was a fighter. And together, they would face whatever the wilderness had to throw at them. The wind carried a sharp chill through the forest as dawn broke, illuminating the clearing where Ember stood grazing near the cabin. Eli leaned against the cabin's doorway, watching the Mustang with quiet admiration. The horse had come a long way from the frail, defeated creature he'd found tied to that tree. Ember's coat now glistened in the early sunlight, the scars on its legs still visible but healing. Its movements were more confident, its head held higher with every passing day. But there was unease in Eli's chest. The wolves hadn't been seen in days, and their silence only heightened his sense of foreboding. The wilderness was rarely kind, and Eli knew better than to let his guard down. He grabbed his rifle and slung it over his shoulder, stepping into the clearing. "We need to stretch those legs of yours, boy," he said, his voice breaking the morning stillness. Ember flicked his ears in response, lifting his head from the grass. Eli fashioned a simple lead rope from a length of sturdy twine and approached the Mustang cautiously. Though Ember trusted him more with each passing day, there was still a wildness in the horse's eyes, a reminder of the untamed spirit that had kept him alive. "Easy now," Eli murmured, looping the rope around Ember's neck. The horse snorted softly but didn't pull away. Together, they ventured into the woods. The towering pines cast long shadows over the forest floor, their needles carpeting the ground in a soft green blanket. Ember walked beside Eli, his hooves crunching softly against the earth. Eli kept a firm hand on the rope, his eyes scanning the trees for any sign of movement. "This world's got its dangers," he said, more to himself than to Ember. "But you're stronger now. You'll be ready for whatever comes." As they walked deeper into the forest, Ember began to relax, his steps growing more confident. Eli led him to a shallow stream where the horse drank deeply, his muscles rippling beneath his coat. Eli knelt by the water, splashing some on his face. The cold was invigorating, a reminder of the life pulsing through the wilderness. For a moment, it felt as if the world had paused. The forest was quiet, save for the soft babble of the stream and the occasional chirp of birds overhead. Eli watched Ember, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You're a fighter," he said. "Always have been." But the peace didn't last. The faintest rustle of leaves reached Eli's ears, so subtle that most wouldn't have noticed. He froze, his hand instinctively going to the rifle slung over his shoulder. Ember lifted his head, his ears swiveling toward the sound. The forest, so tranquil just moments ago, now felt heavy with tension. Eli stood slowly, his eyes scanning the trees. The rustling grew louder, closer. His grip on the rifle tightened as a low growl echoed through the woods. A pair of glowing eyes emerged from the shadows, followed by another and another. The wolves had returned. The pack emerged into the clearing, their sleek bodies moving silently through the underbrush. Ember snorted, his muscles tensing as he backed closer to Eli. The wolves circled slowly, their eyes locked on the Mustang. Eli raised his rifle, aiming at the largest of the pack. "Not today," he muttered, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The alpha wolf let out a low growl, its sharp teeth bared as it stepped closer. Eli fired a warning shot into the air. The crack of the rifle echoed through the forest. The wolves flinched but didn't scatter. Instead, they crouched lower, their bodies coiled like springs, ready to pounce. Eli knew he couldn't take them all down. The wolves were too many, their hunger driving them to take risks they wouldn't normally consider. He glanced at Ember, who was now pawing the ground, his nostrils flaring. The Mustang wasn't just scared, he was ready to fight. As the wolves crept closer, Eli made a decision. He dropped the rope and stepped back. "Go, Ember," he shouted. The Mustang hesitated for only a moment before rearing up, his powerful legs striking the air with a defiant cry. He charged at the wolves, his hooves thundering against the ground. The wolves scattered, their snarls turning to yelps as Ember lashed out with his hind legs. The alpha wolf lunged, but Ember dodged with surprising agility, his movements fluid and precise. Eli watched in awe as the horse, once so weak and helpless, fought back with the strength and determination of a true survivor. Within moments, the pack retreated, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. Ember stood in the clearing, his sides heaving, his eyes blazing with triumph. Eli approached cautiously, his heart pounding. "You did it, boy," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You faced him down." Ember snorted, tossing his head as if to say he'd known all along. Eli chuckled, placing a hand on the horse's neck. "You're something else," he said. "Something else entirely." As they made their way back to the cabin, the forest seemed lighter, the shadows less imposing. Eli glanced at Ember, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. The Mustang had proven himself, not just a survivor, but a fighter, a creature of strength and spirit that refused to be broken. And Eli knew, as they walked side by side through the wilderness, that they were stronger together than they ever could have been alone. The crisp morning air carried a sense of calm as Eli opened the cabin door. Rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the forest floor. Ember grazed peacefully in the clearing, his ears swiveling with every sound. The wolves were gone, and for the first time in weeks, Eli allowed himself to relax. But deep down, a lingering unease nudged at him. The wilderness had its way of testing even the strongest. Eli stretched his back, his rifle slung across his shoulder as he prepared for the day's chores. His routine hadn't changed much since taking an Ember, gathering firewood, checking his snares, and foraging for herbs. But the presence of the Mustang had added a layer of purpose to his solitary life. He had someone to care for now, someone who relied on him. In a way, Ember had brought Eli a kind of companionship he hadn't felt in years. As he approached the edge of the clearing, something caught his eye. Tracks, large and deep imprints in the soil, unmistakably left by horseshoes. Eli knelt down, running his fingers over the marks. They were fresh, too fresh to ignore. A chill ran down his spine. "Someone's been here," he muttered under his breath. His sharp eyes scanned the tree lane. The thought of someone intruding on his isolated sanctuary unsettled him. Most folks in the area knew better than to venture this deep into the forest. Whoever it was, they had a reason for being here, and Eli doubted it was a good one. By midday, Ember had grown restless. The Mustang pawed at the ground, his nostrils flaring as if sensing something was off. Eli noticed the change in the horse's demeanor and tightened his grip on the rifle. He trusted Ember's instincts. Animals often felt danger before it was visible. "Easy, boy," Eli said softly, approaching the Mustang. "We'll figure this out." The sound of hooves broke the silence, faint at first, but growing louder. Eli's body tensed as he turned toward the noise. From the trees emerged 3 men on horseback, their faces obscured by wide-brimmed hats and scarves. They moved with a purpose, their eyes scanning the clearing until they landed on Ember. "There he is," the tallest of the group said, his voice gruff. "I told you he'd be here." He dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a thud. "That horse doesn't belong to you, old man," he said, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. "He's ours. Took off during a storm a while back. We've been looking for him ever since." Eli stepped forward, positioning himself between Ember and the men. "This is private land," he said, his voice steady but firm. "You've got no business here." The man chuckled, his hand resting on the revolver. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said, his tone laced with mockery. "But you're outnumbered. You really think you can stop us?" Eli's grip on the rifle tightened. "I don't care how many of you there are," he said. "That horse isn't going anywhere." The standoff stretched on, neither side willing to back down. Eli's heart pounded in his chest, but his hands remained steady. He'd faced danger before, wolves, storms, the unforgiving wilderness, but this felt different. These men weren't just a threat to Ember. They were a threat to everything Eli had come to care about. The man raised his hand, signaling to the others. "We'll be back," he said, his voice low and menacing. "And next time we won't be asking." With that, the men turned their horses and disappeared into the trees, leaving Eli and Ember alone in the clearing. Eli lowered the rifle, his mind racing. Whoever those men were, they weren't going to give up easily, and he had no intention of letting Ember fall back into their hands. That evening, Eli worked tirelessly to fortify the cabin. He reinforced the doors and windows, set traps around the perimeter, and kept the rifle loaded and within reach. Ember stood near the cabin, his eyes scanning the shadows as if keeping watch. The Mustang had become more than just a companion. He was a partner in survival, a living testament to resilience. As the moon rose high above the forest, Eli sat by the fire, his thoughts heavy. The wolves had been a test of strength, but this was different. This was a battle of wills, a fight for what was right. He glanced at Ember, who stood tall and proud despite the scars on his body. "We'll face them together," Eli said quietly. No matter what, the forest was unusually quiet the next morning. Even the birds seemed hesitant to break the silence. As Eli stepped out of the cabin, his rifle resting on his shoulder, Ember stood grazing near the tree-line, his ears twitching at every faint rustle. The Mustang's body was relaxed, but his watchful gaze told Eli everything he needed to know. The men would be back, and they wouldn't come alone. Eli had spent most of the night preparing for their return. He had fortified the cabin, set traps around the clearing, and mapped out every potential blind spot. Years of living in the wilderness had taught him how to defend what was his, and he wasn't about to let a group of hired thugs take Ember without a fight. The morning passed slowly, every moment stretched thin with tension. Eli moved through his routine with practiced efficiency, but his mind remained on the previous day's encounter. He replayed the men's words, their threatening tone, the way their eyes had lingered on Ember. They weren't going to stop. They saw the Mustang as property, a tool to be used, and they'd do whatever it took to get him back. By midday, the sound of hooves shattered the stillness. Eli froze, his pulse quickening as he grabbed the rifle and stepped outside. 4 men emerged from the tree-line. This time, each one was armed and mounted on powerful horses. The leader, the same tall man from before, wore a cruel smirk as he dismounted. "I told you we'd be back," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing. Eli raised the rifle, his stance unwavering. "I don't take kindly to trespassers," he said. The man chuckled, shaking his head. "You're out of your league, old man," he said. "There's 4 of us and 1 of you. Be smart. Hand over the horse, and we'll leave you in one piece." Ember snorted, pawing the ground as if sensing the danger. Eli glanced at the Mustang, his resolve hardening. "This horse isn't yours," he said. "You abandoned him, left him to die. That makes him mine now." The leader's smile faded, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said. "But guts won't save you." The standoff escalated quickly. One of the men drew his pistol, but before he could aim, Eli fired a warning shot into the air. The sharp crack of the rifle echoed through the clearing, startling the horses and sending a flock of birds flying from the trees. "Next one won't miss," Eli said, his voice low and steady. The leader held up a hand, signaling his men to hold back. "You think you could take all of us?" he asked, his tone mocking. "You're just one man." Eli smirked. "One man who knows these woods better than you ever will." As if on cue, one of the traps Eli had set earlier snapped shut, catching one of the men's horses by the leg. The animal reared, throwing its rider to the ground. The man scrambled to his feet, cursing as he tried to free the horse. Eli took the opportunity to step back toward the cabin, keeping the rifle trained on the remaining men. "Leave now, and no one else gets hurt," Eli said. "But if you step 1 foot closer, I won't hesitate." The leader's face twisted with rage, but he seemed to understand that Eli wasn't bluffing. He turned to his men, barking orders. "Get him and get that damn horse." The next few moments were a blur of chaos. One of the men charged toward Ember, a lasso in hand. But the Mustang reared up, his powerful hooves striking the air. Eli fired another shot, this time grazing the man's shoulder. The attacker fell back, clutching his arm, as his horse bolted into the trees. Ember, fueled by instinct and fear, lunged forward, breaking free of the rope tethering him to the clearing. He charged at one of the remaining men, his hooves striking the ground with thunderous force. The man panicked, his horse stumbling as he tried to retreat. Ember's wild, untamed energy was a force to be reckoned with, and even the seasoned riders couldn't keep up. Eli used the distraction to his advantage. He aimed for the leader, who was now backing toward the tree lean, his eyes darting between Eli and Ember. "This isn't over," the man growled before turning his horse and disappearing into the forest. The others followed, their retreat hasty and disorganized. As the dust settled, Eli lowered the rifle, his chest heaving with adrenaline. Ember stood in the center of the clearing, his sides heaving, his eyes blazing with triumph. The Mustang's defiance had been key to driving the attackers away, and Eli couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. He approached the horse slowly, his voice soft. "You did good, boy. Real good." Ember snorted, tossing his head as if to say he'd known all along how it would end. Eli chuckled, patting the Mustang's neck. "We're not done yet," he said. "They'll be back, but we'll be ready." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forest in golden light. Eli set to work reinforcing his defenses. The fight wasn't over, but he and Ember had proven they were more than capable of holding their ground. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with, a man and a Mustang bound by resilience, determination, and an unshakable will to survive. As darkness fully descended, the forest came alive with sound. The distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the wind, and the faint crunch of footsteps too faint for most to notice. But not for Eli. He froze, his eyes narrowing as he turned toward the tree lean. They were here. The first sign of their approach was the glint of lantern light filtering through the trees. 4 riders emerged from the shadows, their horses moving in a tight formation. This time, they weren't playing games. The leader, his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his face, dismounted with purpose. He carried a shotgun, its polished barrel gleaming in the moonlight. "We're not leaving without the horse," the man called out, his voice cutting through the stillness. "You've got one last chance to hand him over." Eli stepped out from the cabin, his rifle raised. "I don't think you understand," he replied, his voice calm but firm. "This horse isn't going anywhere. Not with you." The man smirked, his grip tightening on the shotgun. "You're a stubborn old fool," he said, "but stubbornness won't save you." The air grew heavy with tension as the men spread out, their weapons drawn. Eli's heart pounded, but his hands remained steady. He had faced danger before: wild animals, brutal storms, the unforgiving wilderness. But this felt different. This was a test of his resolve, a fight for what he believed in. Rusty, Eli's old hound, trotted at his heels, his graying muzzle a reminder of the years they had shared in solitude. "Rusty," Eli said quietly, glancing at the dog. The dog's ears perked up, and he darted into the shadows, disappearing from view. Eli knew Rusty would take up a position near the traps, ready to create a distraction if needed. The first shot rang out, shattering the silence. One of the men fired into the air, a warning meant to intimidate. But Eli didn't flinch. He took aim and fired back. The crack of his rifle echoed through the clearing. The bullet struck the ground near one of the men's horses, causing the animal to rear and throw its rider. Chaos erupted. Ember, sensing the danger, reared up, his powerful legs striking the air. One of the men tried to lasso the Mustang, but Ember lunged forward, breaking free of the rope. The horse charged toward the attackers, his hooves thundering against the ground. Eli fired another shot, this one grazing the shoulder of the leader. The man cursed, stumbling back as blood stained his shirt. The remaining riders hesitated, their confidence shaken by Ember's ferocity and Eli's precision. But the leader wasn't ready to give up. "Take him down," he shouted, his voice filled with rage. Eli retreated toward the cabin, using the structure as cover. He fired another shot, this one striking the leg of a man attempting to flank him. The attacker cried out, falling to the ground as his horse bolted into the forest. Rusty emerged from the shadows, barking fiercely as he darted toward the men, drawing their attention away from Eli. Ember's wild energy was the turning point. The Mustang charged at the leader, his hooves striking with terrifying force. The man raised his shotgun, but before he could fire, Ember reared up and knocked the weapon from his hands. The leader stumbled, his eyes wide with fear as the Mustang stood over him, a living embodiment of the untamed wilderness. "Call them off," Eli shouted, his rifle trained on the remaining attackers, "or you won't walk out of here." The leader hesitated, his gaze shifting between Eli and Ember. Finally, he raised his hands in surrender. "Fall back," he yelled to his men. "It's not worth it." One by one, the attackers retreated, disappearing into the forest like shadows. Eli lowered his rifle, his chest heaving with adrenaline. Ember stood tall, his sides heaving but his spirit unbroken. The Mustang snorted, tossing his head as if to say he'd known all along how it would end. "You did it, boy," Eli said softly, approaching the horse. "You showed them what you're made of." Together, they had faced the odds and come out stronger. The men wouldn't return, not after what they had seen. Eli knew that the wilderness had its own way of enforcing justice, and tonight it had been served. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Eli stood with Ember in the clearing. Both of them were battered but undefeated. They had fought not just for survival, but for freedom. And in doing so, they had forged a bond that nothing could break. The first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, illuminating the clearing where Ember stood tall and proud. His chestnut coat shimmered in the soft light, the scars on his legs a reminder of everything he had endured. Nearby, Eli leaned against the cabin's porch, his rifle resting by his side. For the first time in weeks, the air felt light, as if the forest itself was breathing a sigh of relief. The men who had come for Ember were gone, their arrogance shattered by the defiance of a Mustang and the resolve of a man who refused to back down. Ember grazed quietly in the clearing, his ears flicking toward the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. The Mustang had been through hell, but he had emerged stronger, a testament to resilience and the unbreakable spirit of the wild. Eli watched him with a sense of pride and admiration. The horse had saved himself, but in doing so, he had also saved Eli. The cabin had always been a place of solitude, a refuge for a man who had chosen to live apart from the world. But Ember had changed that. The Mustang's presence had brought life back into Eli's days, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, there was still room for connection and hope. Eli walked to the edge of the clearing, where Ember lifted his head to meet his gaze. The horse's dark eyes were calm now, no longer clouded by fear. Eli reached out, placing a hand on Ember's neck. "You're something special, you know that?" he said, his voice soft. "They tried to break you, but you didn't let them." Ember snorted, his breath puffing in the cool morning air. Eli chuckled, patting the Mustang's neck. "I think it's time," he said. "Time for you to go back to where you belong." Eli spent the next few hours preparing. He removed the makeshift halter from Ember's neck, running his hand along the horse's mane one last time. The Mustang stood still, as if understanding what was about to happen. Eli opened the gate to the clearing, stepping aside to let Ember see the path ahead. "You've earned it," Eli said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "Go on now. Run free." For a moment, Ember didn't move. He looked at Eli, his dark eyes reflecting something unspoken, a bond that neither time nor distance could break. Then, with a powerful leap, he took off, his hooves thundering against the ground as he disappeared into the forest. Eli watched him go, a bittersweet smile on his face. The clearing felt emptier now, but it wasn't the same as before. Ember's presence had left a mark, a reminder that even in the deepest solitude, there was always the possibility of connection. Weeks turned into months, and the forest settled back into its familiar rhythm. The wolves returned to their distant hills, the men stayed far away, and Eli continued his quiet life in the cabin. But every so often, as he walked through the woods or sat on the porch, he would catch a glimpse of a chestnut figure moving through the trees. Ember was out there, free and wild, just as he was meant to be, and though he no longer lived in the clearing, Eli felt his presence as surely as if he were standing beside him. The wilderness had a way of testing those who called it home, but it also had a way of rewarding those who stood firm. For Eli and Ember, their story wasn't just one of survival. It was a testament to the power of resilience, trust, and the unbreakable bond between a man and the wild. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, illuminating the clearing where Ember stood tall and proud. The scars on his legs were a reminder of everything he had endured. Nearby, Eli leaned against the cabin's porch, his rifle resting by his side. For the first time in weeks, the air felt light, as if the forest itself was breathing a sigh of relief. The men who had come for Ember were gone, their arrogance shattered by the defiance of a Mustang and the resolve of a man who refused to back down. Eli knew they wouldn't return. The wilderness had taught them a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. Ember grazed quietly in the clearing, his ears flicking toward the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. The Mustang had been through hell, but he had emerged stronger, a testament to resilience and the unbreakable spirit of the wild. Eli watched him with a sense of pride and admiration. The horse had saved himself, but in doing so, he had also saved Eli. The cabin had always been a place of solitude, a refuge for a man who had chosen to live apart from the world. But Ember had changed that. The Mustang's presence had brought life back into Eli's days, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, there was still room for connection and hope. Eli walked to the edge of the clearing, where Ember lifted his head to meet his gaze. The horse's dark eyes were calm now, no longer clouded by fear. Eli reached out, placing a hand on Ember's neck. "You're something special, you know that?" he said, his voice soft. "They tried to break you, but you didn't let them." Ember snorted, his breath puffing in the cool morning air. Eli chuckled, patting the Mustang's neck. "I think it's time," he said. "Time for you to go back to where you belong." Eli spent the next few hours preparing. He removed the makeshift halter from Ember's neck, running his hand along the horse's mane one last time. The Mustang stood still, as if understanding what was about to happen. Eli opened the gate to the clearing, stepping aside to let Ember see the path ahead. "You've earned it," Eli said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "Go on now. Run free." For a moment, Ember didn't move. He looked at Eli, his dark eyes reflecting something unspoken, a bond that neither time nor distance could break. Then, with a powerful leap, he took off, his hooves thundering against the ground as he disappeared into the forest. Eli watched him go, a bittersweet smile on his face. The clearing felt emptier now, but it wasn't the same as before. Ember's presence had left a mark, a reminder that even in the deepest solitude, there was always the possibility of connection. In the heart of the wilderness, where the line between life and death is often blurred, stories like Ember's remind us of the power of resilience and compassion. This Mustang, once left to die in the snow, found a second chance at life. And in doing so, he gave Eli a second chance too. Their bond, forged in the crucible of survival, stands as a testament to the unbreakable spirit of the wild and the enduring connection between humans and animals. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Mustang Tales for more inspiring stories of courage, survival, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Together, let's celebrate the spirit of the wild and the heroes who fight to protect it. Until next time, remember, every life has a story worth telling.